You're listening to Top Line Winnipeg with Nick Lynham and Brady Ricketts, presented by From Financial.
Welcome back to the Top Line Winnipeg Jets podcast, brought to you by From Financial, as we try and take another deep dive in what's going on with these first place in the NHL Winnipeg Jets through 21 games, 17 4-0. The start's been exciting. Been a bit of a roadblock lately, losing 3 of their last 5. What's going on? Some big injuries, some big pace numbers, some big projections. Let's dive into it all today. Brady Ricketts, how are you doing on this Sunday evening?
So happy to be talking about another first place team again today. Yours in the Central and the entire league, mine in the Atlantic. But yeah, it's gonna be nice to walk us through, some of the highs and lows of the first quarter of the season. Almost officially, we're not quite at American Thanksgiving yet, but we're getting to the point of the season where we can definitely start to make some assertions of who's going to be where soon enough when it comes to the time of the year that matters in April.
And the Winnipeg Jets have definitely set themselves up great for that April run when you're looking at how much points they've banked early in this season. I mean, 34 points out of a possible 42 through the quarter mark. Not too shabby out in Winnipeg.
Nope. No, I mean, a great start to the Winnipeg hockey season, a great start to the Winnipeg winter season as well. I mean, November 24th, I walked about 4K to go get groceries because it's still so nice out. I mean, everything's kind of sunny and great right now.
It is, and with it being so sunny and great, obviously there's some pretty sweet numbers that get attached to that. Let's dive into some of it. We know regulation wins is the first tiebreaker once we get to the playoff seeding time. The Winnipeg Jets currently in first with 14. The Devils trail them at 13. This team is first in goal differential with a plus 34. 7 higher than the Carolina Hurricanes, who ranked second. Not bad, eh?
Oh, I didn't even know it was that good.
First in regulation OT wins with all 17. This team hasn't reached a shootout yet. Next closest is Carolina and New Jersey at 14, who both are having real strong starts out in the East. This team is currently first in goals for at 85, with Vegas and Washington trailing at 81 as the next highest. They're fifth in goals against at 51. Dallas in the division currently leads at 44. That's a pretty nice low mark for those Stars.
Yeah, I'd say. Wow.
You see all those numbers, and what comes to your mind, Brady, before we start breaking into them even further?
How many goals they score. In that case, to have such a high goal differential while still being fifth in goals against. And that, I think, kind of speaks to, as the goals against, I should say, speaks to, I think, the strength that we see on the all the way back in of the Jets with Connor Hellebuck as well. Dallas leading the goals against at 44 and not being first is kind of crazy, because that is literally at this point of the game or point of the season like 2 goals a game that they allow. Most teams are going to win that matchup most nights.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see, and obviously that's a team we expect at the end of the year to be among the strongest in the Central. And a lot of these numbers, obviously, you really highlight the goals for component. I think that's probably the area that surprised most of us. I know Sean Reynolds was talking about on the broadcast last night that the Jets are scoring 20% more goals per game than they did last year. And that's a big jump. Not so much, and we'll dive into that. But that starts to come on the back of some pretty insane paces we're seeing around some individual players. Mark Scheifele currently pacing for 47 goals. Kyle Connor pacing for 51. Could potentially be the Winnipeg Jets' first 50-goal season. Nick Ehlers pacing for a career high at 35. I mean, Josh Morrissey pacing 8. Strong for a defenseman. Neil Pionk pacing 12. Didn't really have that one coming in. Gabe Velarde looking for his first 30-goal season, pacing 31. Even a guy like Vlad Nemestikov, this is a number I don't think he's going to hit, pacing 23 goals.
Yeah, holy cow.
Nino Niederreiter pacing 31. So early on, you've seen a lot of individuals hitting some levels that maybe you expect a bit of a fall off. Looking at that, I do think Kyle Connor could be the Winnipeg Jets' first 50-goal season.
Yeah.
Having trouble seeing a guy like Mark Scheifele get to 47, especially thinking he's dealing with a wrist injury that we'll dive into a little bit later. Can Nick Ehlers get to 30-plus for the first time in the way he's being utilized on that power play?
Yeah.
Gives you
getting
some
30
hope.
would be huge as well.
Yeah, especially for him going into a contract negotiation this summer.
I won't lie as well. I definitely had Neil Pionk 12 goals at the end of the season. I had that as my free bingo space, I'm being honest with you. that was written in the stars.
I certainly didn't have Vlad Nemeskov at 20-plus, and I imagine that's going to be one that we're going to see really bump down here.
But what if he does it?
And are you going to tell me that Dylan Samberg won't score 12 goals this year? That's where he's based.
Well, we'll see what happens with his foot. He'd have to come back from that one with on a rage of goal scoring to account for it probably, but you never know.
But as much as we're joking around and seeing some of these numbers, pretty impressive just to have that kind of start through the quarter mark of the season. I mean, Kyle Connor pacing a 100-point season when factoring in assists. Scheifele just under. Ehlers, who everyone talks about being a 60-point guy. A lot of that, if you've listened to this podcast, being because of usage in years past. Looking at a 90-point pace early. Fun team to watch, despite what we'll get into breaking down some of this. And it's certainly been a joy to turn on Winnipeg Jets games this year because of some of these big starts.
Absolutely. I mean, the Kyle Connor pace is nuts. He's going to outpace or outpoint produce Mitch Marner, who's still never seen a 100-point season at that rate, which is damn impressive. Because instead of just being the empty calorie goal scorer that he's been linked to being every now and then, I mean, you put up 51 goals, 51 assists, I think you're in yourself as a decent role as a playmaker as well. You got to put respect on that game.
And it's interesting because obviously there's been long talk about Kyle Connor being the most underrated player in the NHL. Something I've disagreed with some time in this market. Especially, it's hard for me to keep saying someone's underrated when they're consistently ranked in the top 10 of their position, despite in years past having some flaws in their game. We're actually seeing Kyle Connor take that step and be a lot more involved in hockey games, both backtracking. We've seen some of that, though that line last night had some issues in that regard. We are seeing him seem to step up as a leader and take more accountability in his own game, to the point where I start buying the arguments of him potentially being in those conversations if he could put in a full season like we've seen the start. And that would be a pretty massive gain for the Winnipeg Jets based on what we've seen from the past two this year. Obviously, something I've harped on is the lack of top-end talent, and this team is still missing at least one core piece to feel comfortable about a run. But it does help elevate the ceiling of this team, a ceiling I've often described as high floor, low ceiling. If they continue to get some breakouts like that, I think it does raise that ceiling a bit, though we still are going to be breaking down some of this. And I'm not so sure all of it is sustainable.
I have a fun little question for you. If Kyle Connor does keep at that pace or maybe even outproduces that pace for points at the end of the season, let's say he finishes 105 and the Jets still are first place in the Central, do you think that he gets what do you think he have better odds of winning then, the Hart or the Lady Byng?
Oh, he lost Lady Byng this weekend, buddy.
I know, with the fight.
Fought Sidney Crosby. I mean, that's even something we wouldn't expect to see from Kyle Connor.
The plus 50,000 bet that I had for Crosby and KC to have a scrap, that cashing felt so good.
Made you a rich man this weekend, eh?
Oh, yeah.
And it was him throwing a reverse hit that gets that whole thing going. Like we're talking about, we're seeing some actual progress into his game. Especially one area, and I really highlighted it on the landing strip after the game. They had scored a power play goal on Friday night that I just thought was textbook execution for that group, and it really showed well on an area of Kyle Connor's game that I think when he's patient with the puck, he becomes a lot more dangerous, right? Because everyone knows he's a shooting threat. But I found in years past, the puck's on his stick. That's the guy that teams are jumping at because, he's not necessarily the most talented board battler or guy in one-on-one situations. He's been a lot more controlled with the puck and being a lot more patient with it, which on this goal on Friday, you see Josh Morrissey do a spinorama at the blue line, gets it to Kyle Connor on the wall, and instead of him rushing to get a shot towards the net from that wall spot where he is on the power play, he holds it and takes like a step towards the net, which sees two penalty killers, knowing he's a threat to score, move up to him, which leaves Gabe Vilardi wide open in the slot, and Kyle Connor goes to that playmaking aspect on a nice soft little area zone pass. Vilardi makes no mistake with it. So it's like those areas in his game where it looks like it could be a bit more confidence. It could be him realizing that he can impact games at a higher level than he has, that are definitely making him a more dangerous, more talked about player, in my opinion.
Yep, 1,000%. Moving into some more numerical breakdowns so far in the beginning of the season. The goals for, we kind of hinted on about 4.04 right now per game, which is high. And I think that kind of lends itself to also some of the point paces that we've seen from some of these players so far. What's your take on that? Where do you think the sweet spot number where this team ends at 82 games is?
I think we are going to continue to see some regression from there. I know we were talking a couple weeks ago, and the Jets were the number one team in outscoring their expected goals, and it was something like 24, 25 expected goals 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. That number has cratered down to 7.8, which you'd expect, right? Regression, you're not going to outscore what you're creating as often as they have been. And when you start to break down that 4 goals a game, just over 4 goals a game, 20 of it's coming from the power play in 21 games. So you're getting nearly a goal a game from the power play. And we'd been discussing it. This power play looks to be the real deal, but they weren't going to ride a 40% margin the entire year. We've never seen anybody do that. It's now come down to 33%, which, hey, 1 out of 3 still good. I imagine that's going to settle in the high 20s, low 30s as the season progresses. I thought yesterday was a good example of that power play being legit when they go against the best penalty killing group. Yeah, they might not have beat UC Soros, but I thought they created some really quality looks in the center of the slot. So you want to see that even on a night when it doesn't produce. Mm-hmm. I do think when you're looking at that goals for number, it is a little too dependent on the power play compared to what they're generating. We've seen them lose 3 of the last 5 games. In all 3 games, the power play does not get on the board, and it left the Jets to scoring 2 goals in those 3 games combined. And then you start to look at it. So they've scored 20 on the power play. They've scored 61 at 5-on-5, which is about 2.9 a game, just under 3. But if you look at what they're creating at 5-on-5, which has been a pretty constant discussion for us outside of a couple games where it looked really, really strong, they've scored 61 at 5-on-5 on 42 expected goals. So they're scoring about 3 goals a game while they're producing about what you'd expect to score 2. So I think that number is going to continue to struggle. And then if you just look at the total aspect, they currently are 13th in the league after 21 games in expected goals for. Clearly a top half of the league type team, clearly a playoff team. But we're obviously excitedly talking about this team potentially doing more because of such a start. And that's an aspect where they will need to get better. They currently are still 10th in expected goals against. And if this team's in the top 10 with the way when you have Connor Hellebuyck in the back of the net, I think that's a spot you're more than happy to be in. Even Eric Comrie continues to give them quality starts and just not get the run support. So I'm not necessarily worried about the backside of the game, though I think this next stretch is going to show some warts without Dylan Samberg, and we'll get into that a little bit as this show goes on. But big picture, for the Winnipeg Jets to maintain this early season success, they really are going to have to start creating more at 5-on-5. And I think a big part of that is those 2 skill groups. And it was a talk before the season. It was a talk 10 games in. Then there was a good stretch. But if we look at both those groups on the whole, it's too much of a roller coaster and not quality enough minutes from some of your most impactful players at 5-on-5. The Adam Lowry line continues to be this team's driver at 5-on-5. And those two skill groups, the Mark Scheifele line, the Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Gabe Velarde line, and the Vlad Nemeskov, Nick Ehlers, Cole Perfetti line are just way too up and down that I'm still not someone that's sold that the Winnipeg Jets at their best are going to have that alignment.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And let's dive into that a bit more then, because I know you have some stats brought up on those top lines right now.
Yeah. So let's look at the top group. Obviously, this is the group the Winnipeg Jets believe could be a top 10 first line in the NHL, or they wouldn't keep going to it. And obviously, I think when you see them have quality offensive nights again, it's mostly against some of the lesser teams in the league, though they had the big second game against Florida, which I think was a feather in their cap, probably their best game as a group. But if you just look at what they've done through 21 games, 270 minutes now, getting outshot attempted, 287 to 275. Not ideal, but again, when you do have some of the stronger players, you hope they can outscore it a little bit. If you want to be a top line on a contender, though, you need to see a bigger margin there as far as
that's not a crazy insurmountable number though on the shots for and against right now. That's a pretty slim margin that a couple of good games here and there can really bring that back to 500 or above.
That's the thing though. I'm kind of tired of the idea that this line getting to 500 is going to be enough, because if you're looking at taking the next step, a 500 first line is not enough.
No, it's
a below average first line.
Yeah, and like at some point being on the fence about it is for sure tiring and frustrating. I can see exactly where you're coming from.
When you further get into the breakdown, they have finally surpassed what they've given up versus what they have scored. They're outscoring opposition 14-13. But again, to be a top line on a team that we want to see play 2, 3, 4 rounds of playoff hockey, it's not going to be enough. I mean, we've seen it now last year, and this has been a clear step forward from last year. There's no mistake about that, but it's still a 500 top line. And if you look at the expected goals, 50.29% on the dot. So again, not necessarily killing you, though it's been one of those things. When that line is really bad, this team has no chance. And when they're strong, obviously it's exciting to watch and you see some highlights. But if you just look at this group on the aggregate, they still need more. It, as much as the point numbers we were talking about and the pacing is exciting, when such a big part of your game is dependent on a power play, scoring a goal a game, and then that regression comes, you can't have a top group that's merely running 50% if you want to take the next step.
Yep, 100%. And then we can dive into that one a bit into the second line as well. We got some couple notes here. There's discussion around, I think you have this quote from Jason Bell about the Jets brass getting tired of Cole Perfetti.
Yeah, so let's look at that line for a second here. And this is a line that, for me, still remains disjointed. I just don't think the player types are going to be a fit. We've known coming in, Vlad Nemeskov's a quality depth player, and he's being asked to be a 2C. It's hard to see how much offense dies on that stick and expecting that to work over the course of a full season. And we do know that Cole Perfetti, stylistically, and Nick Ehlers, unless Nick Ehlers became a spot-up shooter, I just don't see the jive. So if you start breaking into their numbers, currently the shot attempts are 201, 199, slightly ahead. But again, this is a group that you expect, especially with a guy like Nick Ehlers, who is a top 3 forward on this team, and a guy that has carried 5-on-5 lines to success with some pretty tough line mates at times. So I could, question Nick Ehlers at 5-on-5 not being able to do what he once was able to do and carry a line to success. I just don't think this is going to be a line that's gonna work, and I get why they keep going to this alignment. They're 17-4-0, but big picture, we are going to need to see some tweaks. They've outscored their opposition 11-5, but that's on 45% expected goals. And if you look at the high danger chances on that group, it's 37 against, 29 for. So even on the shot attempts they're creating, and they're slightly ahead there, they're not getting them from those high danger areas that will likely transition to more goals. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of those things where we've known this, and we're riding this high of the early season success. But if we take that success and you want to build on it and make sure that you're getting the most out of this group when games start to matter, when things get tougher, I don't look at either of these two lines as the groups that I say, hey, yeah, it's 17-4-0. This has been the lineup. It's gonna keep going this way. And I see that breakdown. I see what it looks like at 5-on-5. I see how involved the power play's been with creating that offense for this group. And I look at these two lines specifically because the Adam Lowry line continues to run great margins across the board, outscore their opposition. The fourth line's not going to score you a ton, but guess what? They're spending more time in the O zone and actually providing something for the next line to come out and try and capitalize on. At the end of the day, that 5-on-5 offense, you're expecting to come from your most skilled offensive players, and it's those two lines, and it's just not quite good enough for where you want this team to eventually get to.
Yeah, 100%. So that was a good breakdown of it. Why don't we touch into a bit more of that quote about Cole Perfetti there?
Yeah. Found it pretty interesting that in a game where pretty much nobody showed up after the first period and the top line was at fault for at least 2 of the goals and 1 got called back, so potentially 3, that we're going to the old Cole Perfetti is a problem narrative. Especially coming off, I thought he had a strong game on Friday. He's been in a stretch here where his only assist in the last 6 games comes on the Kyle Connor empty netter to seal the game Friday. A game where Scott O'Neill trusted him with 17-plus minutes. And I'm not buying the idea that Brass is getting tired of him if you're seeing Cole Perfetti get opportunities at the end of the game to be out there in such a situation with a lead. My take on Cole Perfetti is this. There's going to be ups and downs. We know this. This is still a young player figuring things out. But I'm not buying the idea that this can't be an effective player in heavy hockey, as Jason Bell tried to indicate. I look at Cole Perfetti's game. I think he's gotten real strong, especially a player his size. Like, we were just bragging about Friday, him running over Noel Acciari, who's a grinding level 4th liner, and Cole Perfetti's able to stand him up.
Yep.
When I see Cole Perfetti getting involved in the corners, from what I'm looking at, I think he's become very effective at using his body to protect the puck and create openings from it. I look at his game, and one aspect I think's become quite good in it is when he does lose those battles, he's been one of those guys that's sneaky good at getting that stick lift and retrieving it back. Now, the points haven't been there. I thought yesterday night was a real tough game with the turnovers. I just think it's a bit of an overreaction over a small stretch of games here that he's a big problem and the brass has to be frustrated, especially when we're seeing Arneal at times giving him more responsibility. I don't think it's jiving. Yep. Obviously, you want to see some more production there. But as we just talked about with those 2 skill groups, if you have 2 skill groups that don't fit each other or aren't going to provide what you want at 5-on-5, I think it's a big ask to ask the youngest of that bunch to be the one driving that change. Like, it just feels like a quick overreaction to a stretch of games here from a kid that's got 14 points in 21 games in his first real stretch in the top 6.
Especially when we kind of already chatted about someone like Vlad Nemestikov kind of having the puck die on his sticks at times, even though he is on pace for, I think, what'd you say, a touch over 20 goals? Mm-hmm. Like, that would be his career high, I think, by quite a few, no?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, so, like, to me, it seems like, I don't want to, it seems like Perfetti's going to be being the scapegoat at the moment for what should be kind of a glaring upgrade possibility right there, written down in the lineup every night, and maybe a little bit of a rejig then if the stylistic matchup of Ehlers and Perfetti aren't quite working, but at the same time, the top line, we've said it up and down a bunch of times this season and beyond, they like to play with each other. They like to play together.
I just think if you look at the Winnipeg Jets, wing groups, and I'm someone that likes to look at building lines by duos. I think if you look at Cole Perfetti and Kyle Connor, their games synchronize a lot better than Kyle Connor and Gabe Vilardi. If you look at Gabe Vilardi and Nick Ehlers, I think what they like to do in their games synchronize a lot better. I think just even that kind of tweak with getting those two winger sets together makes a massive difference for all four players involved. And I know we haven't seen it yet, but at some point here, you're going to have to take what the underlying numbers are telling you, what you're seeing at 5-on-5, and be willing to make an adjustment to try and squeeze more out of this group before the deadline comes, before new impact players potentially come. And I think it's crazy to just spotlight the one guy. I'm not saying that he can't be better, though I think he's looked like an NHLer to me this year. He's looked like a guy that could be productive in the top six. I've liked him quarterbacking the power play too. And I just think you're putting too much weight on the youngest of the bunch on a whole group that doesn't necessarily fit how you want skill groups to fit together.
And I think Perfetti's been quite resilient, especially with the fact that he didn't have a contract going into training camp and didn't have one until the very end. So even I know we went to the game against Minnesota. We both noticed that he was maybe a little bit slow at that time, but then to immediately kind of turn that around into what he's done so far, like I don't see him being the real problem in that forward group at the moment. But moving on from there, we do have, we talked, I think, lightly about the Samberg injury, but we also have another one that you think Mark Scheifele is dealing with at the moment as well.
Yeah, I think it's become pretty clear the last two games that Mark Scheifele is nursing something in his hand or his wrist. I'm wondering if it was from the Aaron Ekblad slow dance scrap from the Florida game. Why I say this, Gabe Vilardi is all of a sudden taking all the faceoffs for Mark Scheifele. He gets kicked out yesterday and Kyle Connor takes a draw. There's a big indicator that something's not right with Mark Scheifele. If you watched his Nashville game, which was probably up there for one of the worst games in the NHL Mark Scheifele's played, watching him in one-on-one battles for a guy of his size and when he's locked in, can push guys around and can be physical. He was seemingly looking to wrap guys up and create battle situations than necessarily be physical. He took 3 minor penalties, 2 of them a hold, 1 of them a trip, rather than engaging with a guy. In the last 2 games, he's been set up for his one-timer on the low circle on the opposite side of the ice. One of them missed the net by like 100 feet, and the other was a whiff that ended up like going over the net softly. I think something's up there. We'll see what it's like. Could be a strain. Obviously, nothing's broken if he's still playing. And I imagine he's going to keep trying to play through this, though it looks like a net negative right now dealing with it. Because, hey, Team Canada nomination's on the line, and this is probably his last shot to wear that Team Canada jersey. So I imagine you're seeing a bit of the balance between that. And it's something I was a little disappointed with the coaching staff yesterday, honestly. We've really hyped up Scott O'Neill and the staff having a good grasp on the game and willing to make adjustments depending how the game goes. And I found yesterday's back-to-back game was the first time he didn't, in a sense, where the top line, 11-2 in shot attempts, 10% in expected goals, plays as much minutes as they did. And we saw yesterday as an example of the long shifts creeping back into their game. On a back-to-back, probably not the scenario you want to be trying to extend shifts in. And it was the first time we didn't see Scott O'Neill either make the switch when it was a 1-1 game going into the third to try and get something going in a game that was still winnable. But it was also a game where we didn't see him adjust the minutes either. And it was my first time being disappointed in the old bench staff, given what we're seeing. And they would know best if Scheifele's hurt. And I imagine everyone knows it. They're not going to say it. But why keep pushing that in a night it's not going his way, knowing that?
And when, like, we're still speculating on an injury, like, we're not 100% sure. We kind of, as all fans do, you're kind of looking for the game within the game at times on broadcasts. I know I am I notice all the time when guys are grabbing water bottles on the bench, and you'll notice wrists are taped up or they have braces on. Like, yeah, a lot of guys tape their wrists up just to have the extra support for battles and all that. But usually if they have something like a brace, or I know you noticed this one that Scheifele, they went to one where he was kind of, felt like it almost looked like he was trying to stretch something out in his wrist. And with some of the other on ice performances too, like, honestly, at the same time with the Jets, like, if it is something that's a bit more on the day-to-day side, you built up a cozy enough, margin right now that I think you have the ability to give him a couple days. And this kind of leads us to our next spot of, this is probably a good time to bring up some prospects and get a look why over the big picture, because not only do you have the Samberg injury right now, but you also have the Scheifele one to take into consideration.
Yeah, so we're going to see the Ville Heinola run. Obviously something I've been looking forward to for some time, though I can't say this is the spot I was hoping for it in. But we had a call from Brandon in Alberta on one of our post-game shows this past weekend. I believe it was Friday. And Brandon was really discussing Brandon, I can't remember. That's my bad. Sorry, bud, in Alberta. Discussing the idea that with the Jets having such a big lead in the standings, that they could really use some of their top prospects who we've talked at will about with the Moose. Obviously, the three big ones being Chibrikov, Lambert, and Salmonson. And the idea being that, hey, when you've built up such a lead, is there places in the schedule you could find a game or two to give them a stretch, see what they look like in the NHL level, and you could still freely send them down. And I also had a few texts being like, why is anyone thinking about that at this moment? And I'm going to present the side of why that would be something to potentially consider. I think it would be a great way to give guys load management if they are dealing with smaller tweaks like this. Obviously, you don't want something like that to get worse, and all of a sudden what could have been a week or two absence, not even, becomes multi-week, and then you're really thrusting in one of those guys to take a big role.
And then you're in the dog days of the season, and you never know if a slide comes, then guys are hurt. It's a compilation of, or compiling errors at that point when you're talking baseball a little bit. Yeah,
and it's just one of those things that it's also info gathering, right? You're getting a look at what your top guys look like at the NHL level in some spots where you're still benefiting from giving a guy maybe a night off, a couple nights off to heal. It also gives you a much better idea of who you want to keep at the deadline, who could potentially impact and take this thing over. And that's where it gets tricky to manage, right? Because obviously you want to manage the room. Yep. And this team's been very successful. Probably a hard sell to say, hey, 17-4-0, and guess what? You're sitting for Brad Lambert tonight. Not an easy sell to a bunch of vets that have been successful. But
prideful
the flip
and
side,
competitive as well.
Yes, exactly. But the flip side of it, too, is as an organization, you want to turn over every stone so that you're winning come April through. And if a guy internally could pop up and fill a role for you on an ELC because they're ready for the NHL, all of a sudden you're spending less assets at the deadline, or you're able to allocate those assets in a very specific way looking for a missing piece. And that's where this gets interesting. And I know Choices TK, who tunes in, has been kind of spotlighting early December when the schedule softens up to try something like this. Mm-hmm. Don't see the Winnipeg Jets doing it unless they struggle over the next couple of weeks. And, hey, they've lost 3 of 5. But I do think there's validity to that idea, especially we're already talking about the idea Vlad Nemestikov's not necessarily a 2C fit. And at some point, we're either going to trade for someone or a guy like Brad Lambert's going to fill that role. And when you look at a situation like that, Vlad Nemestikov becomes an upgrade on the fourth line. So if you're able to fill that hole up in the center spot, you've now upgraded 2 different spots going into the deadline and are able to really, really find those niche fits. Mm-hmm. We'll see. Not necessarily something this org's done in years past. But I do think there's validity to trying things like that, especially when you've built up this base of being a top team. The system's in a pretty good place, but you see that there's cracks in the old armor that you'd like to get more from.
Yep.
It's an interesting combo to me.
Yep. So moving forward, why don't we talk a bit more on the special teams so far? So right now, the Jets are currently first in the NHL still, with the power play rocking at 33.9%. PK from the beginning of the season has taken a slide, which I think this is probably the percentage that you and I thought initially this team would start out with and probably increase as they started to gel together a bit more. But let's hear some of your thoughts on the special teams so far at the quarter point.
Power play, love it. It's honestly the biggest driver of the Winnipeg Jets, and we talked about all those offensive numbers. Having a power play, again, 20 goals in 21 games is a pretty absurd thing, and it feels like whenever they go out there, there's going to be a chance to impact the game. Tweeted out yesterday for like the Nashville Predators to take an early too-many-men penalty against the Winnipeg Jets. Do not recommend. It's exciting to go out there because you get different looks for both units and how each unit's built, which has been interesting because the power play 2 has been pretty damn effective in all of this as well. They've seen a lot less ice, but they've really built it off of the Pionk Perfetti up top area and look for Perfetti to make those passes that we know he can. And then they load up the bodies in front of the net and crash and bang. Compared to the top unit where it's a lot more movement based, we see Nick Ehlers now using the Connor McDavid support role. So there's always an opportunity to get him the puck and create some open space off of it. They're doing a very good job at finding the seams that open up when they do move. We've seen a lot of different looks from the one we were talking about where it's all up high, Morrissey, Connor, high slots of Velarde. But we've also seen a lot of Nick Ehlers from the corner or Mark Scheifele from the corner to the opposite side where Kyle Connor is for a one-timer look. Like they are creating a lot of offense in different ways. Gabe Velarde being such a net front presence and dangerous there helps too. It does really feel like this power play unit is going to be dangerous as long as they can establish the zone. That does tend to be where the power play goes a bit awry for them, is still gaining the zone once they've regrouped. And that's like the one area. Once they get in, man, it's a lot of fun to watch. Like I said earlier in this show, to see them create those opportunities against the best power play despite not scoring, I think was just another positive as to believing in this power play being a real figure to this team moving forward, which in itself is a massive gain for the Winnipeg Jets from years past. Last year, they were a middling power play, and we saw, especially during that slog, I want to say in January, where they were in one-goal games and the power play just would not do anything for them. I'm pretty sure there was a stretch last year with one power play goal in 21 games. So you look at just the difference between that now. It is an aspect where this ceiling of this team has raised because of it, and that's positive.
Yep.
On the PK, a little concerned about it, especially with what I was seeing this week. I thought the Pittsburgh game, the Winnipeg Jets at 5-on-5, just suffocated the Pittsburgh Penguins, but the Pens were able to kind of stick around in that game. Some soft calls, but the power play really kept them around. And what I've kind of seen, and we saw it again yesterday too, the PK wants to get into a tight diamond in that home plate area, but it seems like when they get sucked out of that diamond, like let's say a guy like, I noticed this play yesterday, Adam Lowry gets pulled up to the D-man. Teams are really quick to expose the separation within that unit. I don't know if it's a lack of speed from the Killers when they try and make an aggressive push, but you know the top guys on any team in the league, if you give them time and space, they're going to be able to find those guys, and we are seeing the PK leak some pretty quality chances of late, mostly due to some really big seams they're starting to allow. Another example we did see outside just seams was the Pittsburgh power play goal. Rasmus Kupari, for some reason, gets pulled to the wall during a battle down low between Dylan DeMello and Dylan Samberg. And because of that, as soon as that battle's done, the puck pokes out towards the slot. All three penalty kill guys were beat, and it's a 2-on-1 against the high forward that has to sag back. Yeah. And it's just things like that, getting pulled out of that structure, getting pulled out of that position, are creating some pretty wide openings for other teams to take advantage of. And you look at any power play in this league, there's a lot of skill, a lot of talent, and you give them time and space, they're going to make you pay.
Yep. 100%. So I know we kind of hinted at this, at least I have a little bit coming up, but Dylan Samberg now is likely out with an injury. I think it's been released as a broken foot. Block shot off of Steven Stamkos one time in the latest Nashville game. It sounds like Ville Heinola is going to get the runway to play some games. He is coming to the Jets after only 2 games in a conditioning stint with the Moose. I know you want to talk a little about some quotes from Eric Dubois, who is the D coach down for the Moose.
Yeah, big test for the Winnipeg Jets coming up. Talked about it on the postgame show. I believe Samberg is the second most important defenseman on this D-core. He was a guy that was obviously an elite third pairing shutdown D-man last year, and the big question was, would that parlay into top 4 success? We've seen so many defensemen struggle to make that jump. Guess what? Dylan Samberg is not one. He's really grown with that role, which has been really positive to see. This
Impressively
is a D-man.
so as well. Impressively so.
He's become a modern-day shutdown D-man. Yeah, the puck skills at times are a little frustrating, but even some of his instincts of when to jump up into the play is creating some pushes for Winnipeg where, it's been impressive to watch Dylan Samberg and the step he's taken. Obviously, to be able to stabilize Neil Pionk, who we know is having a great offensive start to this year with the points, is a big feather in his cap as well, just knowing the chaos that sometimes comes with playing with Neil Pionk.
He reminds me a lot of Jake McCabe, if I'm being honest. I think that's a pretty decent comp for him.
Interesting. I'm going to have to start watching a little bit more Jake McCabe than years past.
I think you would like him too.
So this is a big blow. I don't think stylistically they have a D-man quite like Dylan Samberg. This is also a guy that went from playing 15 minutes a night to getting the hardest leverage minutes for the Jets so far this year. Coaching staff clearly really trusts him. Big on the penalty kill. And that second pair has been their best pair. So make no bones about it. We might in jest be talking about Dylan Samberg being the early season MVP, depending on how this stretch goes. That's how important I think his roles become on D.
Yeah.
On the flip side, we're getting the Ville Heinola runway finally. And Ville went down to the Moose, played 2 conditioning stint games. Sounds like the first one was rough. As the team expected. This was a guy that hasn't played hockey in, 7-8 months, jumping back into professional hockey. They said the puck touches in game 1 were a little off, as you'd expect, looked rusty. But Eric Dubois really hyped up his second game and felt he had gotten to a level where he got a lot of touches out there and was making a lot of smart reads up the ice, which is what the key figure in his game is. Eric Dubois credited his hockey sense for his ability to figure that out only in game 2, and that being his big calling card is how well he understands the game. So you're not getting a Dylan Samberg type here, but I do still believe that if Ville Heinola comes in and is at his best and is able to get a runway here, I'd be very happy if he's a very good third pairing guy, especially when Samberg gets back. All of a sudden your left side looks like Josh Morrissey, Dylan Samberg, Ville Heinola, all 3 drafted and developed. All 3 at a very affordable rate, which could be a real boon for the Winnipeg Jets as far as the D-core goes. But I also do think it's a massive ask based on what I was just talking about with Dylan Samberg, where Ville Heinola is, I think, a solid defender, but his calling card is jumping up into plays, moving the puck, transitioning the puck, and creating offensively, which is the reverse of Dylan Samberg. They almost pair if you pair those 2 together, I think that's a great compliment.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating for me to see where the coaching staff goes with the D pairs, how Heinola is able to adjust on the fly here, getting thrown to the Wolves. Hey, he's 23. It's time. At the end of the day, at some point you gotta sink or swim, right? I do think the element he does add that the Winnipeg Jets do lack is that puck moving ability. They get in trouble defensively when they give up the neutral zone and get caught in their own zone. So having a guy that does specialize in transition will have its positives when looking at this team. Also a guy that I think when we're talking about some of this 5-on-5 creation aspect, if we get to see him in the O zone, I think he's going to really open up some stuff for the Jets offensively. Mm-hmm. But it is impossible for me to say this guy's going to jump right into the top 4 and replace what Dylan Samberg's been giving them.
Yeah, no, I mean, to quote Mark Wahlberg, Ville Heinola is a peacock. You got to let him fly on this go around. But this might also very much, kind of emphasize what you think is the heightened need for a defenseman for a defenseman for the Jets. If the kind of craters as bad as it possibly could in Samberg's absence, we don't quite know yet. This is really the first time this season that, like, we've kind of talked about a little bit in the past few shows, but this is the first true bit of adversity this team's going to face in this season right now. So it's going to be really important to see how they react and put that first foot forward.
Yeah, I think it's easy to say next man up mentality, and I think that's what we're going to see here early on. Obviously excited for Heinola to get a look, though. I mean, ideal picture, I was hoping he's taken out a guy like Hayden Fleury, who I think's the more we've gotten to see him, I think you're starting to see why he's had trouble making it as a regular in the NHL. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that, with time and space, I think he does some pretty good things for the Winnipeg Jets, but there's not much time and space in the NHL, and it does seem to kind of collapse on him. So I was hoping a guy like Heinola could come upgrade that third pair, and obviously the second pair has been cooking, and hope DeMello kind of figures it out. It feels like right now there's real no right answers on where the coaching staff should go with this group. Dylan DeMello continues to really struggle out of the gates here. Looks a step slower, and the puck skills aren't there. So you're already seeing that sink the top pair a little bit, which features your best defenseman. So that's kind of a hard thing to work around. Mm-hmm. I am a believer that Samberg's the one that stabilized this second pair. So with all this talk of Neil Pionk, I saw 5th in Norris voting. I'm seeing a lot of hype that we need to sign him. I thought it was pretty crazy, and I get that's how like recent history goes. But Murat's been doing articles every few months on getting the fan input, right? And this summer, it was like a vast majority of people were ready to move on from Neil Pionk, and I think a vast majority of people were correct. After 17 games, he runs it again, and most of this market wants to extend Neil Pionk, and I think this next stretch is going to show us, is Neil Pionk really having a bounce-back season, or is Neil Pionk offensively benefiting from playing next to such a good defensive defenseman? I think this next stretch is going to answer a lot of questions around Pionk himself, which I think is going to be interesting in all this. As for his height and need to trade for D, it's interesting because I think you have to be excited. We talk about it so often that the org calls him a draft and develop team. Yeah. And a former first rounder that a lot of us have been high on in years past is getting that look. And you have to give that look first, I think. You have the 17-4-0 start. This is a guy that might help you internally. I know on our post-game show last night, someone was discussing the idea of this potentially being like when Perreault went down and Kyle Connor got to play in the top 6 back in 2017, 2018, really changing the trajectory of what a lineup could look like. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to give Heinola that runway, man. He's earned it. He was going to make the team out of camp last year. Likely would have been on the third pair to start this year. This is a guy that the org clearly sees as an NHL defenseman. This is a guy I see as an NHL defenseman. He's got to get the first look. Yeah. There's also the aspect that when you face adversity like this, teams aren't offering you gifts. They're offering you landmines and anchors when it comes to trying to make trades. So I think as an org, you want to try and get through some of this stretch and see what you got and see who steps up and who doesn't. Yeah. But let's say I'm guessing, we don't know yet. I'm guessing Samberg's going to be 6 to 8 weeks-ish on a broken foot.
Yeah. Has that been truly released yet, or is that still kind of speculation?
No, Arniel announced that he has a broken foot.
Yeah, around 6 to 8 weeks. That makes sense to me.
Let's say in 4 weeks from now, when the roster freeze is coming into effect, and things are looking pretty tough back there, I think it might have to amp up that need to try and get some help in early. I don't see Hayden Fleury as an answer. I don't see Logan Stanley as an answer. I mean, the one interesting one was, and I wasn't expecting it, but someone kind of talked me into it last night, the idea of Elias Salmonson, who's played, what is it, 17 games, 15, whatever the Moose have played now, and has actually been playing quality hockey. I wonder if he does become an option with one more injury, and we maybe see a stretch there where he shows at 19 years old he's ready to fill a role down the depth chart.
Yeah.
Just an interesting spot to be in. So basically, I'm not rushing to make a trade right now, but I do see the heightened potential of it depending on how this next stretch goes. And the nice thing about where the Jets are in coming into the season, over on Puckpedia, I'm sitting right now just to take a look at it here. They came into the season at 2.6 mil projected cap space. Currently, that's built up to 3.5, which would equate to just under 12 at the deadline. You don't want to burn all of that in December, January, but if you could find some help, if things are going off the rails, might not be a bad idea, though I still think it would be putting a patch job on something that needs a bigger answer when you have more cap available, when you're really strike. It's an interesting contrast they're going to have to manage here if you're the management group of the Winnipeg Jets. What do you think of that? What, Brady, as someone that's like invested into another team but also sees how this kind of stuff works, how would you feel about Winnipeg's decor right now, and would you expect it to heighten the need for a D trade right away?
So this is kind of, it seems like a little bit of a lesser version, at least on the injury side, that the Leafs dealt with last year. Like the Leafs last year, when this is the era where Morgan Riley was suspended, there was a couple of injuries in the back end. Like we had guys like Philip Kral playing meaningful minutes and still finding ways to win. It's kind of the same case though, where the Jets and the Leafs at that point, well, the Jets right now at least have such a cushion that they're able to kind of experiment with some of these guys and kind of get a little bit of let's see what you are. Like I wouldn't even, because I don't know exactly what the roster situation looks like for the Jets on call-ups or IR, all that stuff. Like I know Logan Stanley's hurt. We now have Dylan Samberg hurt. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing like almost like a double call-up or an emergency call-up with someone like Elias Solomonson and just kind of like playing around with it and poking with it, because I know you were saying the schedule kind of lightens up in December a little bit, so I don't think there's a major cause of concern to go out and make a deal that you're probably going to lose surplus value on in the moment in a time of panic. I can see where, like you're saying, in like 4 weeks time when that roster freeze comes, because that roster freeze, if I'm not mistaken, will be for Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at what point of the season is the Four Nations face-off going to happen?
Mid-February.
Mid-February? So I think at that point you'll have like a little bit of a sweet spot in that January kind of dog days, where that's where I think more teams that are on the outside are going to start making the choices of, are we sellers or are we going to try and compete? I think that's a better time to try and make a deal if things have kind of really gone off the rails on the defensive end.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. At some point, you got to believe in the group that you've put together, and it does look faulty right now. If you're looking for some optimism, in 10 games together, Ville Heinola and Neil Pionk have oddly been strong together. I think if you're
strange,
I think if you're making a trade early, especially on the decor, I still think it only makes sense if you're getting that solidified top four, preferably top pairing level right-handed D, and making your deadline trade early, knowing you have Samberg coming back later.
Yeah.
And a trade like that, just based on the cap, would likely mean a roster piece going back. It's hard to imagine acquiring a top pairing defenseman that also you retain money on. I mean, those are some of the most valuable assets in the league, and teams selling wouldn't necessarily need to do that. I think that's the only way, because, yeah, if you start putting patchwork solutions together just to get through this stretch, I think you could talk yourself into the idea you address the decor earlier in the year when you're still going to have that big hole to worry about later.
Yeah.
I think ideal world, you're hoping Dylan DeMello finds it. If not, I think in a big picture, you're looking at Morrissey, Blank, Samberg, Pionk, Heinola, DeMello with Miller as your seventh. I think that's the ideal world situation here. Heinola comes in, looks great. You almost build 2 second pairs down your lineup and try and find a Morrissey partner that could really win those top line minutes. And it's just hard to see that coming up right now at this point in the season. And I feel like you'd almost be rushing into something that you might regret in a couple months, knowing there is bigger fish to fry with this team, and they are set up to get to the deadline where they could do some real damage. I mean, $12 million at the deadline is quite handy to be able to spend, pending injuries, of course. But I also do see why, with such a good start, you wouldn't want to see a fall off, and you'd want to address that soon too. I love the idea of keeping the flexibility and hoping a guy like Hanela could at least bring something that you're not concerned about, that you could still get through this schedule or get through this injury as long as possible before pulling that trigger. Now, if early January comes and more teams are starting to realize they're out of it, I think it opens up some different options, and maybe, maybe helping this team with a push, maybe it does mean getting a reliable 2C early, and you're able to maybe outscore teams until a Dylan Samberg comes through it. I don't know if it necessarily has to be a D-man. I think we know that the two needs are, and if you can maybe address one of them early, go for it. I just don't know if I'm racing out to do it with my back against the wall and sacrificing some of this cap flexibility that they're smartly building up.
The only reason, like, I don't – there's another reason, too, is that I think in the last few years we've kind of seen the trade deadline only become the trade deadline by name alone. A lot of the big deals happen a couple weeks beforehand now. It's not the trade deadlines where the blockbusters were on the day of or an hour before are kind of long gone. A lot of business getting done a few weeks before that. Like, that's another reason why I kind of almost echo the idea that, yeah, if you're noticing an issue that you think is going to be not something that you work your way through, you know, especially in a month sample size with Samberg gone, if you're noticing, yeah, maybe it's not the defensive core that's really hanging out to dry, but maybe you are looking to get that 2C, because I think there's two kind of hard positions to trade for, and one's a good center and one's a good D-man. Those aren't exactly easy positions to trade into. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're able to bang off one as soon as possible, you already know it's probably going to be an area you need to improve upon. I don't think there's an issue with pulling the trigger sooner rather than later and letting that guy get accustomed to your system in your locker room and their line mates.
Well, which you touch on there too, with the idea that the Winnipeg Jets really do need to go acquire two of the hardest positions where everybody's going to be trying to acquire, and that's right-handed D and 2C. It's where that earlier conversation about big picture and seeing what you have on some of these prospects that are closer to the league and what they could provide plays in, right? Because you're not wrong. Those are two of the hardest things to kind of bring in, and I think it's a big ask to be able to do both. But all of a sudden, if someone internally could give you more than you expected in one of those spots, you're able to allocate all those assets to the one and make an aggressive push. So, hey, a lot of we're going to learn a lot about the Winnipeg Jets over the next 2 months without Dylan Samberg.
Just look at the Timmy Liljegren trade. That's a good right-hand D-man who went for, what, a third, and Matt Benning, who's already been waived? Mm-hmm. That's an early trade, too.
So the interesting part about the Jets, and Liljegren was the guy I was interested in, I'm having trouble with this myself because obviously the David Jiricek conversation is pretty lively right now, and it's expected he gets moved this week. Now that's a top 5 pick. That's a right-handed D at 20 years old. Like, those assets don't come around available as often. No. And I see the allure of why a bunch of people want the Jets to be in on that, because it would give them 2 shots at a young right-handed D to really fix something that's been a problem since Buff and Trouba walked away. The tough part is he's not going to be cheap in assets. He's not a sure thing this year. And the Winnipeg Jets have kicked the can down the road so far. Like, they need more certainty than a guy like David Jiricek, as much as I think he would impact the future real well. This is the window. Like, it's these 2 years, and that's where it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle this.
Yeah, it's going to be – I mean, Jiricek's only played a game in the AHL this year.
Mm-hmm. And that's not a guy you're betting on to come fix problems here.
No, not at the moment, no. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Fortin, seeing where we're at this point next week, see if some of these themes are continuing, or if we do kind of get some band-aids applied. It's gonna be fun to watch the Jets for a little bit through this first bit of resiliency. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, hey, it's always nice to see how a team responds to some tough times. It's really what's gonna make it or break a team, and this team's given us a lot to be excited about early. Obviously, as discussed, it's a big loss, and hey, they've been one of the healthiest teams in the NHL so far. Other teams are dealing with big losses like this. I'm just really curious to see how they handle some of the external stuff around it.
Big time.
All right, Brady, I really enjoyed this one.
Yep.
Hey, we've been talking for nearly an hour. Some interesting conversations around the Winnipeg Jets. If you're following along, make sure you tune in post games over on YouTube and twitch.tv/Topline Media, where the post game show I've had a blast doing. Nice to get to bounce different ideas off the community, see where other people's heads are. We've had some really interesting discussions over there. So, hey, if you're looking for a post game experience, come check us out. We're having a lot of fun doing it with Mikey. And we'll see you next week as far as the Top Line Weekly show goes.
Thank you. Shout out Mikey.
This has been a Top Line Media production.